Yeah, so I can name a few contradictions in the Bible. So the Bible says that God is all-knowing. Psalm 147:5 says that his understanding is infinite. 1 John 3:20 says that God knows all things. Matthew 10:30 says that he knows the number of hairs on our heads. But in Genesis chapter 18, God says he's going to go down to the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to know how sinful they're being. An all-knowing God would know that. He wouldn't have to go down there. Also, an all-present God would already be there. Another contradiction, or I guess inconsistency, is that in the books of Matthew and Luke, in the resurrection story, it says that the women who discovered the empty tomb ran off and told everyone that the tomb was empty. But in the book of Mark, it says that the women were afraid and didn't tell anyone. And then of course there's the whole God is love, but then it also says that love is patient and kind, never jealous or boast. But then it says that God is a jealous God, so how could God be love if love isn't jealous? But yeah, there are a lot more, there's dozens. Those are just a few that stuck out to me, and I know most Christians watching this are going to be like, oh, well this means this, and this is actually this, and jumping through hoops to try to make it make sense. If Christianity made sense, there wouldn't be 45,000 denominations.
Well, let's deal with that last point first. Truth does not require that everybody agree on it. That is just not an adequate test for truth. And when you look at these alleged contradictions, certainly there are passages in the Bible that, if read next to one another, look inconsistent with each other. These are easy to find. But the question is whether or not there's a good explanation. For example, take the first one. In the passage that he cites in the book of Genesis, what you have is an anthropomorphic description of God in the form of a man or three men. And this is not meant to be interpreted in a literalistic way. The Bible will very often use anthropomorphic descriptions of God, speaking of God's eyes and ears and his arm. Even sometimes he's portrayed riding on the clouds in his chariot. And these are not meant to be taken literalistically. Remember that the Old Testament in particular is not a book of systematic theology or philosophy of religion. These are stories about God's dealings with humanity. And these stories often exhibit all of the storyteller's art in using figurative and anthropomorphic images of God. So I don't think this is a serious problem. Now, as for the role of the women at the tomb, this is a good question. Mark's gospel just breaks off at verse 8 with the women fleeing from the tomb that they've discovered empty and don't speak to anybody. Now, it's worth noting in passing here that the large majority of scholars believe that the empty tomb narrative of the women's discovery of the empty tomb is historical, that this is an actual historical reminiscence of the women who actually found Jesus' tomb empty. So even though you have this apparent inconsistency, that has not led scholars to doubt the historicity of the core of the narrative, namely that on the first day of the week after his crucifixion, Jesus' tomb was in fact discovered empty by a group of his female followers. Now, I think that Mark, though his gospel ends at verse 8 and just breaks off there, knows that the women did go on to tell the disciples about what they had discovered, because he foreshadows the resurrection appearances in Galilee. He says through the angel to the women, "Go and tell Peter and his disciples that I am going before you into Galilee, and there you will see me." So the angel prophesies these resurrection appearances and tells the women to go tell the disciples about this, and we know that they did go to Galilee, where they experienced these post-mortem appearances of Jesus. So I think what Mark intends his reader to infer from his narrative is that they didn't tell anybody on their way back to the disciples. They fled from the tomb. They ran straight to the apostles to tell them what they'd experienced, and they didn't stop or tarry along the way to speak to anybody. Finally, what about God's being a jealous God? Well, God, I think in the Bible, is jealous in the sense that a husband demands an exclusive love relationship with his wife. He doesn't want any third party, any other man to come in between them. And in that sense, he's jealous for the love and single-hearted devotion of his wife. And that's the way God is toward us. He doesn't want anything to interfere with our love relationship with him. And in that sense, it is a perfectly good thing to be jealous in the sense of wanting this single-hearted and pure devotion.